3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Revolution Gathering. So glad you're all here today. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. All right, I've been told I can be heard, so that is fantastic. We got a lot of ground to cover. I'm still trying to figure out how to use my phone as a camera because I really do like that. I do like that camera a little bit better, but until then we'll use this. You kind of get to see the whole backdrop though for this. So that's kind of cool. Move the microphone for a second. You can see all the goodness that's happening there on the old backdrop. Well, good morning, everyone. What are we going to talk about today? We are going to be talking about a lot of different things. We're going to be talking about grace and love and acceptance and a lot of other issues. But before we jump into that, we're actually going to also be covering a little bit of the Paul Tillich's You Are Accepted, which is one of my very favorite sermons of all time. Probably spend a couple weeks going through that. But yeah, so it's been a week. I'll tell you that. Still dealing with the I don't want to call it a fallout, but the kind of being on the evangelical Christian radar again, which in a lot of ways has been great, but it's also been challenging. It's been challenging to deal with a lot of people who see things quite different than I do, and seem to feel very threatened by compassion for especially immigrants right now. And that's really, really sad. A lot of defense of the mistreatment of immigrants because these folks talk a lot about law and order and things like that. And it really seems like a lot of people have gotten their Christianity and politics so mixed in together that they forgot the most important commandment is the love of God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, and faith expressing itself through love. And they seem to be more about some sort of American justice. I don't know how to explain it. And that's been a bit disheartening to the point where, they even ignore the suffering of the folks, what they're going through in Gaza, because they're so passionate about deportation, and I was also talking about the heartbreak of kids, Christians not supporting kids having a lot of free meals at school. And they didn't seem to care about that either. And so it really feels like we've gone in the wrong direction for a very long time, and that the church is going in a really horrific direction. And we have got to help these folks snap out of what they've been really taught their whole lives to believe as the gospel, that it's not just good news for a few. We're going to kind of cover why I think that is. But I wanted to say a few things before we really jump into today's talk. I mean, it's been great to interact with people and have tough conversations. I do enjoy that, but some folks are so full of fear. It seems like their pastors and their preachers and their politicians have filled them with so much fear that they've really created the other as an ultimate enemy. I mean, I had one guy talk about, he's afraid the communists are going to take over, and if he does, he's going to get locked and loaded, which means, he wants to get his gun out, and he thinks the communists are going to kill the Christians. I mean, it's just such a fantasy land of scapegoating. It's too bad. And on the other end of that is that, you've got a lot of progressives who are like, yeah, we don't need you here, or, who can be really not sensitive to the understanding that a lot of them were there at one point either. So, you get this kind of TNT almost of people coming together. And, a lot of people's first thing they'll come in and be like, that's because you worship a little orange man and it's all his fault. I mean, it's like, there's no that might not be the way to to change minds and start the conversation. I mean, I get pretty harsh sometimes. I get really harsh, but I try to get harsh with like the truth that they're throwing at me to kind of help them be like, well, this is what you're saying, but this is what you're doing. Let's look at this. And then well, this is what other things say, but it can get really confusing. And the division some people really seem to enjoy that. And I guess it's because it gives you a little bit of, gives you a little shot of adrenaline when you fight online, which, yeah, it's like a cup of coffee. The past few days I've been waking up to the news of innocent civilians and children being bombed and killed and shot by soldiers of the Israeli government. Hungry and starving pictures of kids every day, babies, toddlers that look like little skeletons. Even the animals there are skin and bone in Gaza right now, and malnutrition, and then starving people to death, and then when they come to eat, they're being bombed and killed. And for me, it's just too much. At some point, I think we're beyond it, but we've got to stop saying no war. Stop the war. Don't fund Israel. I mean, I just watched a ton of Republicans and a ton of Democrats vote, including AOC. So, to vote to still support Israel and their defense systems and all this stuff and put money back into this war machine. So, this is not just about one group of politicians, folks. This is about our government as a whole supporting the eradication of Palestinians in Gaza and other places, and just writing blank checks for folks to continue what seems to me to be a horrific genocide. I've had a lot of pushback from folks over the past year about this stuff. From both sides, honestly, which is wild. And, be careful about calling it genocide. And so 6 months ago, I was really careful about that, but it seems that it just doesn't end. And it feels like it is a genocide. It is a genocide. Like I was trying to be respectful of some of the people I was having conversations with. But at this point, when do people start speaking up? And to me, the silence is just horrific. Dr. King said it's not the horrible things that people have said that will have to be repented for, but it's the silence of the good people that will have to be repented. And there's so many good folks out there who seem to be very silent on this issue. And, if you always hear these things, like, if you ever wondered what you would have done during this issue, now. And I've always felt like, well, that's a little much. But now I'm kind of feeling like this is where we're at. We're like, oh, well, how did these things happen? Well, like this, with us being completely complacent and silent, and well, I can't do anything about it, so I'll just shut up, or I can't do this. And so we just sit by and watch the horror unfold in front of us every day. And at this point, I don't think we have much, none of us will be able to say, well, we just didn't know what was happening. We didn't see it. We see it, and we still go, and, I saw people like, well, they should release the hostages. I'm like, okay, that's great, but starving people and killing innocent civilians, this is not the way we do things. And the fact that we as Americans, Democrats and Republicans, the two-party system has put billions of dollars into supporting this and doesn't put its foot down and say no more is horrific and very telling of the place that our country is in. Not to mention just the continuous mistreatment of our immigrant brothers and sisters, and how many Christians refuse to see these folks as brothers and sisters. And, they go to these crazy, open borders. You guys just want open. And I'm like, I'm not saying we need to open borders, but what I'm saying is that we need to be humane with the way we handle this. And there's better ways to do it. Helping people who've been here a long time to become citizens, or helping people get to where they go, not putting them in jail cells and cages. And both, Obama built those cages. So, we have to deal with that every day, that this is the reality of the world we live in, that neither party is the savior. And it reminds me of when uh, Chuck D from Public Enemy, and by the time I get to Arizona, I have a little Chuck D figure right there. He said, neither party is mine, not the jackass or the elephant. And I used to quote that all the time, and it was really wild because people never liked that comment when I was back on Twitter. Because everybody we get so divided and think this will do. Oh, you can't compare these two groups together. But when both are supporting what seems to be the murder of innocent human beings, and especially children, um, you can compare those two together. They might be treating us Americans different. And it's really funny. They're like, what really breaks my heart is to see groups that have been marginalized and horribly treated. Yet some of those folks were like, well, if it's good for me, I can ignore the genocide. And that's heartbreaking. We need to see that hypocrisy. We need to see that contradiction, and we need to wake up and ask ourselves, why? Why is it that my safety and that my freedom is more important than these other people and over the world? But that seems to be human nature, sadly. And so I think that's why we probably still need preachers and teachers and people who speak out, and social justice workers and peacemakers and folks like that, because so many people are just focused on their own comfort. And yeah, we have a lot of issues here. Like, healthcare is horrible in this country. Um, it's hard to make a living. I was working 3 jobs, but because school's out, I'm working 2 other jobs. And I did a bunch of landscaping this week and stuff like that. And it's exhausting. And I barely make enough money with this, that, and my painting work to pay all my bills. So we also have to look at the realities of those things every day, and that billionaires with these companies that don't pay their people enough. So there's a lot of horrible things going on in this world, people. And one of the reasons I'm talking about that is because I think maybe some of it, especially for people who claim to be followers of Christ, get it wrong, might have to do with really horrific theology. But unfortunately, it may be the theology of our time in this country. For the past 50 years, we have this theology that sets us up to be almost like a capitalist. It's a capitalist ideal. We take care of ourselves, and that's why, people say, like, tax the rich, not the labor, because the people are the labor, the rich are the few. And we often, look at, like, well, as long as we're okay, that's all that matters. Out of sight, out of mind. But we don't even have that excuse anymore with social media and with what we see every single day. But a lot of people go for it. They go for how do I know that's not AI, or how do I know, and it's just, it's the length that people will go to justify themselves being okay and others not being okay is pretty sad. The capitalist idea that's kind of woven into Christianity, which is not a Christian concept at all, it wasn't even around, is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I think we're seeing when Constantine decided to make Christianity the government of, Christianity the ultimate faith, the faith of Rome. We're seeing the fallout from that. And that was a long time ago, but we continue to see the fallout of that, because before that, Christians were nonviolent, would not join the military, did not participate in law enforcement. Often they were charged higher taxes. Often they were killed because of it. But they refused to hate or kill their enemy or their neighbor. And I think that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because especially now, you see a lot of folks who seem more than just happy to support just war or the death of other people, and compromise and make, it's just really wild to watch people, how they navigate the scriptures. It's been good for me, because I realize I've done it so too. I mean, there's one thing to cherry pick. There's another thing to, like, completely ignore the Beatitudes and completely ignore the words of Jesus and the very basic concept of loving your neighbor. And why, when Jesus told that story, why the good story of the Samaritan was told. I mean, I know I sound like a broken record, but the world feels like a broken record. And, we've realized that we can't just have progress and expect progress to happen. We have to be a part of progress. We can't just sit and be comfortable with progress and think that it will continue. It takes all of us working together. And this is today's message is a lot about all of us working together, that we have to be the ones who speak out loud. We have to be the ones who get organized. We have to be the ones who say, hey, I'm going to take the day off and go on this march, or I'm going to go stand with these people. Or I might just have to, or send a good email. I loved when Dr. King used to say, like, if you can't walk, crawl. If you can't do this, if you clean if you're someone who cleans the bathrooms for a living and do this, clean with the best you can, be a porcelain expert, be the best at what you're doing, but we can get involved in all levels of this. And I understand it's not easy to get involved. I have tried to get involved with the Poor People's Campaign. I've tried to get involved with all these things. And it's just like, I'm like having to constantly, it's like you're knocking on the door. Like, I want to help. I want to speak out. I want to be a part of this movement, and they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then they just nothing. So I understand that it can be difficult, but I do know that there's things that we can do on our own as well. Some people don't think social media makes a difference, but I've seen people change because of the conversations we've had online, conversations I've had with strangers. And, unfortunately, mostly it's just banging your head against the wall, but every now and then you'll see real change happening. You never know where that's going to lead. All right, let's get into this talk. I had I couldn't get the microphone to this microphone to connect to the computer. It wouldn't show up on the YouTube. That's why we were started late today, but I got it figured out. I'm going to get this all together one day, folks. So growing up, I was told, especially in the Assemblies of God, evangelical Assemblies of God, and we were Calvinists. We weren't Calvinists. No, there were Calvinists, and then there were Arminians, and Assemblies of God is Arminian. And so we were told salvation was very, very fragile. And I think a lot of people are growing up with this concept and this idea. It's wild. Like I had this post I had recently put up. I was talking about being exhausted by seeing how people ignore the suffering of the immigrants, and call, followers of Christ, ignore this. And then how they ignore the suffering of what's happening in Gaza, and even sometimes support these things, or how they seem so often to not care about hungry children in the schools in our own country, even, and how disappointed it was. And it was funny because I got some of these people came after me. And one of this person was like, do you preach the repentance of Jesus, to turn your life to Christ and to admit the Lord is your Savior, and ask me all that if you're really Christian. And I had to just like step back for a minute and go like, listen, that's not biblical at all. Like, it sounds biblical because I've heard exactly what you're saying my whole life. Is like, do you preach the salvation of Jesus Christ and the repentance from your sins and turning from? And I had to say, but Jesus, what Paul says about the fruits of the Spirit, that's not in there. What he was saying to me, what you're saying to me, Jesus said the most important thing is loving your neighbor as yourself. Paul said the most important thing is loving, faith expressing itself in love. And here I am expressing self-love, yet this person thinks I'm a heretic because I'm loving the wrong people, because we're loving certain groups too much. And for me, I love all people. I want to see reconciliation with the people who are condemning me. I want to see the reconciliation of the people who are ignoring this stuff. I want to see them come around. I want to see them speak up. I want to see their hearts break. I want to be restored to them. That is the gospel, and that is the concept. That's what where you're trying to do here. So for some reason, it's very hard. People can use broad strokes of judgment, but it's very hard for people to use broad strokes of grace and broad strokes of love. And that happens on both sides. I see it all the time. I don't speak at any of the old evangelical festivals I do, but I don't speak at any of the liberal ones either. I'm not getting invited to those either, because I've always kind of been a fly in the ointment, because I feel consistency is a valuable thing to have when you are a follower of Christ. And it's very easy to just become a mirror image of those things that you disagree with. And I bring that up a lot, and I guess that's caused me to not be very popular. But I feel like the church is dying anyway, unfortunately. But growing up, I was told salvation was very fragile. And I think this might be the reason we have so many, unhinged Christians out here, really. is that they feel like they have this fragile salvation that's based on saying these words and people living like not doing certain things and voting certain ways. And it's gotten so ingrained into their system. And that if they break away from that, for some reason, they're going to burn in eternity for hell and put in a hot oven and never die. And that's just really, really bad theology. But it's a theology that a lot of us know and have accepted over the years. A lot of these folks they live with a very unpredictable God. They never know what they're going to get. Even Calvinists, because Calvinists can be some of the meanest out there. They like to be mean with the pseudo intellectualism of apologetics often, which can be really tough and strange and bizarre. Because then you bring scholarship in, and they're like, "That's of the devil." But even Calvinists who believe in predestination, always are like, "Well, you never know. You might not be that one. You might not be chosen. You might come in for a time." So there's like no winning with this idea of security in being loved by God and accepted by God. So you've got these people who have created God into this almost abusive parent who you have to constantly walk on eggshells around. You never know what's going to happen. And I've had people like that. I have people like that in my life. There's certain things like I don't talk about certain people because I know that they're just going to blow up, or I don't know what to expect. It might be a great conversation. It might be a horrible conversation. And so I learned to just kind of avoid that. But it does affect the relationship. It's like, oh, I know that this is not allowed. This is off bounds. And that's how people treat God, not think, but they also say God created all the world, everything in it. But they don't think that they can, they have to be, God is watching, the big eye in the sky. And they, and then they create this really strange type of gospel that doesn't seem like good news at all. And it manipulates them and it manipulates others. And they have to get angry when they see people showing certain types of love and grace because they're told that that's not really following God. And if they're constantly thinking God's ready to just boom, flick them away or judge them, no wonder they're such a mess, because they're becoming, if they're trying to create themselves, if they're trying to be in the image of God, well, that God is angry and constantly changing its mind, and is unpredictable. And it's scary to have an unpredictable parent. And that's their biggest. And so that turns Jesus into being this really unpredictable savior who didn't really do much with that. That's the wild thing. Oh, before I forget, please don't forget to like if you're here, and subscribe. It really, really helps our work. All right, let's continue to move on. If you're listening online, please leave a 5-star review. That also helps. So then you mix that with the belief in hell. You've got the eggshells, you've got this belief system in hell that looks nothing like the scriptures originally spoke of. If you want to hear a really good talk on hell, look up Dan McClellan's talk on the hell and on hell in the New Testament. It's very good. It's very revealing. It's great stuff. And what you realize is that like Dante's Inferno and stuff has really influenced our concept, and we've really created God into some sort of monster through this concept of hell. And it's easy to see why you would think, well, who cares if those people are suffering? They're going to hell anyway. They might as well have hell here on earth and hell on there. So it becomes this completely out of touch, unloving faith and tribes that just think, well, if that's, if it's all about escapism, either being tortured for eternity or escaping to, the perfect, wonderful, magical place, no wonder people aren't kind to one another. If they think God is going to do that to people, then why? What's the point of not treating people you don't believe that follow the same idea are going to spend eternity with you? Why is it important to treat them well? You don't want to get close to them because you don't want to think about that, right? That's what bad theology does. That's what religion does. And in some ways, if it wasn't for really great thinkers and great philosophers and great theologians, I would just want to completely just get away from Christianity. But thank goodness for people like Dr. King and people like, Paul Tillich and all these different folks who really understood the Gospels, because what we've created, and I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to live in I don't hang out with I don't hang out with really anybody, but I don't want to be in the Christian environment anymore. It's this really strange, eerie, judgmental environment, and it's also become, I've realized that it's become very independent as well. Like all these people were just like, take care of themselves, and they don't support each other, they don't do things, and we don't help each other out. And I'm grateful for the people who do, the people who have me on podcasts and do stuff like that. I think it's really great. But I've always been surprised. I'm really surprised by the lack of people wanting to have community and work for each other, because again, it's like that. It's that capitalist idea, and we've all become like these lone rangers, and it's too bad. It's too bad. We've got to learn to do better. So you've got a lot of these folks who are scared folks who are walking on eggshells. You got hell. And I'll tell you what, eggshells are not a great foundation to build your faith on. I did that for probably 20 years of my life, until I really, and what's funny was what freed me from religion and tradition was actually reading the Bible. Like sitting down and reading the Bible and going, oh my gosh, and just at like a 6th grade level, probably just face value. This wasn't getting in and doing scholarship or anything. That's why I'm always surprised that fundamentalists can be so judgmental. With just reading some of Paul's writings at a very basic level, I think of the New Living, which is not even a great, it's not even a great translation. It's a paraphrased translation. And yet I knew we had gotten it horribly wrong. Like I knew, I was like, we have got this horribly wrong. And this is what Jesus says in Matthew 7:24 about building your faith. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on a rock. Now listen to this. And anyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like foolish men who built his house on the sand. The rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and they beat against the house and it fell, and great was its fall. Now, this is Jesus at the end of his teaching. Do you know what the teaching is that he's talking about here? It's the Beatitudes. It's you've heard that it said of your ancient times, you shall not murder, or whoever murders, love your enemies, do not judge, do not get retaliation, blessed are the peacemakers, the golden rule, and everything you do to others, you would have them do unto you. Judging others, do not judge, and you will not be judged. This is the whole thing, is when Jesus is saying the foundation of your faith is not saying, are you telling people to repent and turn to God and give their lives? It's not that. That's not what the putting a rock foundation, a solid foundation, is building it on love and forgiveness and being a peacemaker and taking care of one another and loving your enemies, love for enemies. It's all these amazing things that are in this book, is that Jesus is telling us this is the way. The Beatitudes are the way. That is how we build on the foundation, is when we love each other, when we love our enemies, we take care of one another. We don't demand our own way. Those are the beautiful things. That's so wild. It was wild to me because I kept thinking about the eggshells, and like an eggshell foundation is the worst thing to build your life upon. And I was like, oh, that verse. And I was like, where is that verse about the foundations? I'd heard my whole, you grew up hearing it and you're kind of like, what is the address? And I just was in the car and I was like, pulled over and I typed, oh, it's Matthew. And I was like, is that right after the, I'm like, no, it would be too interesting if it was right after the Beatitudes. And of course, there it was. That was the end of the Beatitudes, the end of Jesus' teaching is going like, this is how you have a foundation. The foundation isn't based on a belief system. The foundation is based on loving others and loving yourselves. And so that gets me into where we're at today with what I wanted to just read, the beginning of Paul Tillich's You Are Accepted. And the reason I think it's important is because I think if we get to a place where we understand grace and that we accept that we're accepted, which gives us the ability to help others realizing they're accepted. Also having the grace in our own lives to realize that we also have the grace to doubt. One of the things about Dr. King is he really loved this quote by Paul Tillich that said, doubt is not the opposite of faith. It is an element of faith. And so when Martin Luther King was going through reading a lot of philosophy and having a lot of questions about his own faith and things like that, he was really shaken, especially by Nietzsche. But then he remembered those words of Paul Tillich and he goes, okay, this doubt is part of my faith. This is part of it. It's built in there. It's an element of it, which allowed his faith to grow. It's like that quote from East of Eden, now that you know you can be good, you don't have to be perfect. Or now that you know you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. That's it. Now that you know that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And that's how grace was for me, is like, you are accepted. And all of a sudden there were certain things I wanted to change about my life because of grace. My whole life I'd been told that God hated me and God was angry and God was looking down, not by my parents, but by the people my parents hired often, or the churches they would send me to. And, then you realize that there's this grace here and it's transformative. It transforms your life and it transforms your life in a way that legalism and hate and judgment could never do. And it's unfortunate that we've gotten so far away from that. This is the book, Paul Tillich, Shaking the Foundations. So I'm going to try to just share a little bit with this. I hate reading, but it's worth it. We also, Peter Rollins, our number one talk on YouTube is Peter Rollins reading You Are Accepted by Paul Tillich, which I'm envious of. No, I'm grateful for, because the sermon was only written in this book. It was never recorded. So it's nice to have a recording. Pete's got a lovely Irish voice. So he's talking about Romans 5:20 in this sermon. He goes, the Romans 5:20, his quote is, moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sins abound, grace did much more abound. Did you hear that? But where sin abound, grace much more abound. Now listen to what Paul Tillich has to say here. These words of Paul summarize his apostolic experience, his religious message as a whole, and the Christian understanding of life. To discuss these words or to make them the text or even several sermons has always seemed impossible to me. I never dared to use them before, but something has driven me to consider them during the past few months, a desire to give witness to the two facts which appeared to me, and hours of retrospection, as all the determining facts of our life, the abounding of sin and the greater abounding of grace. You hear that? The abounding of sin and the greater abounding of grace. There are a few words more strange than most of us than sin and grace. They are strange just because they are so well known. During the centuries, they have received distorting connotations and have lost so much of their genuine power that we must seriously ask ourselves whether we should use them at all or whether we should discard them as useless tools. But there is a mysterious fact about the great words of our religious tradition. They cannot be replaced. All attempts to make substitutes, including those I have tried myself, I have failed to convey the reality that was expressed. They have led to a shallow and impotent talk. There are no substitutions for the words like sin and grace. But there is a way to rediscovering their meaning the same way that leads down into the depths of our human existence. And our depths of those words were conceived, and they are gained power for all ages. There they must be found again by each generation. And gosh, talk about each generation. We've got about 4 generations back that we need to deal with this. They must be found again by each generation, by each of us for themselves. Let us therefore try to penetrate the deeper level of our life in order to see whether we can discover them and the realities of which our text speaks. Have the men of our times still a feeling of the meaning of sin? Do they? And do we still realize that sin does not mean an immoral act? Listen to this, folks. Sin does not mean an immoral act. That sin should never be used in the plural. And that not our sins, but rather our sin is the great, all-pervading problem of our life. Do we still know that it is arrogant and erroneous to divide men by calling some sinners and others righteous? Listen to that again. Do we still know that it is arrogant and erroneous to divide people by calling some sinners and others righteous? For by way of such a division, we can usually discover that we ourselves do not quite belong to the sinners, since we have avoided heavy sins, have made some progress in our control of this, of that sin, and have been even humble enough not to call ourselves righteous. Are we still able to realize that that kind of thinking and feeling about sin is far removed from what the great religious tradition, both when it's in and outside the Bible, has meant when it speaks of sin? I should like to suggest another word to you, not as a substitute for the word sin, but as a useful clue into interpretation of the word sin. Separation. Separation is an aspect of the experience of everyone. Perhaps the word sin has the same root as the word asunder. In any case, sin is separation. To be in this state of sin is to be in the state of separation. And separation is a threefold. There is separation amongst individual lives, separation of man from himself, and separation of all people from the ground of being. This threefold separation constitutes the state of everything that exists. It is a universal fact. It is the fact of every life, and it is in our human fate in a very special sense. For we as men know that we are separated. We not only suffer with all other creation because of the self-destructive consequences of our separation, but also know why we suffer. Now, if you think about what I'm saying just here about this separation, Paul Tillich is just here saying about sin is separation. Think about what we're seeing with our with Israel and Palestine, and the separation and the wars that are caused from this division. You know, think about what we're seeing with our immigrant brothers and sisters and how this separation and the scapegoatingism of them has caused this horrible violence and horrible attitude and this judgment and a type of racism that we haven't seen in this country in a very long time, at least, you know, on television constantly. It's been there, but we see it everywhere, of that separation. The very fact that I have mentioned children not being able to eat meals, and people saying, I don't want my taxes to go to that, but they don't seem to care about their taxes going towards the military industrial complex, says that we have had some sort of separation from one another, from our children, from our humanity, from our international brothers and sisters, and from our just family. You know, we've become so focused in tribes. So even the separation between conservatives and liberals and things like that, they're still within those two separations, and these tribal separations, there is sin. That's why last week we talked about church not being the community, and that we need to go out. You know, community, if it really needs to take place, it needs to be in the public. We need to live within the public. And because there is no separation there. When we talked about community always has to have an outsider, someone who's separate from them. That is not, they're saying those people were separate from those people, those sinners. But really, when we do that, we are the ones who are in sin. Paul Tillich's really awesome, folks. So you have to forgive me. I get really excited when I read this. This it's probably one of my top 3 sermons of all time. We not only suffer all other creatures because of the self-destructive consequences of our separation, but also know why we suffer. We know that we are estranged from something by which really belongs, in which we should be united. And I feel like this could be the reason I wake up every day, is because I really do feel like we are estranged from something that we should be united with. That when I see the separation, when I see the constant scapegoating by our politicians, especially now, when I see all these things that continue to keep us divided, I have this passion that we can see beyond that. And sometimes I'm begging people to see beyond that. When I'm online and having tough conversations with people, I just so horrifically want them to see something beautiful. We not only suffer with other creatures because of our self-destruction, consequences of our separation, but also know why we suffer. We know that we are estranged from something to which we really belong and to which we should be united. We know that the fate of separation is not merely natural event like a flash of sudden lightning, but that it is an experience in which we actively participate in, which our whole personality is involved. Do you hear that? Our whole personality is involved. And that as fate is also guilt. So, I mean, he's showing us right here that our whole being is involved with us continuously being separated and separate from the other, separate from the ground of being, separate from individuals, all this separation. And sometimes we wear these things like a badge of honor. And it's because we don't put our faith first. We usually put pop psychology first, and we put politics first, and we say those things aren't true. No, I don't really do that, but we all do it. We all do it. You know, when you start bringing, because I mean, I've talked to some super conservative Christians, and at some points they almost made it sound like they were saying, well, we don't really believe what the Bible says. And I've had even really progressive social justice people basically say, well, Jay, you can't really live that way. I'm going like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's where my work comes from. You know, it's almost as like they wink, like, oh, yeah, the biblical way. And if you can't see it consciously, sometimes you can see it people unconsciously, what they really believe unconsciously. They don't even know it, but they've made their ultimate concern all about. In which our whole personality is involved, and that is as fate. It is also guilt. Separation, which is fate, and guilt constitute the meaning of the word sin. It is this which in the state of our entire existence, from its very beginning to its very end, such separation is prepared in a mother's womb, and before that time in every preceding generation. It manifests in special actions of our conscious life. It reaches beyond our graves into all the succeeding generations. It is our existence itself. Existence is separation. Before sin is an act, it is a state. Listen to that again. Before sin is an act, it is a state. We can say the same thing about grace, for sin and grace are bound to each other. We don't even have a knowledge of sin unless we have already experienced the unity in life, which is grace. And conversely, we could not grasp the meaning of grace without having experienced the separation of life, which is sin. Grace is just as difficult to describe as sin. For some people, grace is the willingness to divine King and Father to forgive over again the foolishness and weakness of his subjects and children. I think that's what most people think grace is, because they usually think grace is either a license to sin or a license to not help other people, depending on where your theology is. We must reject such concepts of grace, for it is merely childlike destruction of a human dignity. For others, grace is a magic power in the dark place of the soul, but a power without any significant practical life, a quickly vanishing, useless idea. For others, grace is the benevolence that we may find beside the cruelty and destruction in life. But then it does not matter whether we say life goes on or whether we say there is grace in life. If grace means no more than this, the world should and will disappear. For other people, grace indicates the gifts that one has received from the nature or society and the power to do good things with the help of those gifts. But grace is more than a gift. And grace, something is overcome. Grace occurs in spite of. One more time. Grace occurs in spite of. Grace occurs in spite of something. Grace occurs in spite of separation and estrangement. Grace is the reunion of life with life, the reconciliation of the self with itself. Grace is the acceptance of that which is rejected. Grace transforms fate into a meaningful destiny. It changes guilt into confidence and courage. There is something triumphant in the word grace, and in spite of the aboundance of sin, grace abounds much more. And now let us look down into ourselves to discover there is this struggle between separation and reunion, between sin and grace, and our relationship to others, on our relationship to ourselves, and our relationship to the grounds and aim of our being. Ground of being is often what Paul Tillich refers to as God. If our soul responds in the description that I intend to give, words like sin and separation, grace and reunion may have a new meaning for us, but words themselves are not important. It is the response of the deepest levels of our being that is important. And such a response we are to occur among us at this moment. We could say that we have known grace. We're going to end it there, and I'll share more of you. We'll go through the rest of this next week. But I think there's so much there that kind of shows, look at where we're at. Look at the separation within the country right now. Look at the separation amongst human beings right now. Look at the separation all over the world. And Tillich nails that as sin. And he's saying the only way to really experience grace here is through your reunion. And that we really have to look deep within our souls to see that. And that this concept of grace just being quick forgiveness or something that we had the ability to do is to really sell grace short. And that this idea of separation and reunion are completely tied together, obviously. I think that's why Paul at the end of Galatians says, never think that you're too good to restore someone. I think that's why King constantly reminded us that people weren't the enemy, but misinformation was the enemy, and that nonviolence seeks reunion with people and restoration with people. So I think that's something important for us to remember. And the reason I have all this stuff together today was to say this very thing is that if we understand this type of faith and we understand this type of acceptance, the sermon gets even better. Like, I can't even believe it. It just gets better and better and better. But if we're able to understand this type of grace and this type of separation, then we're not going to have a foundation built on eggshells anymore. We are going to have more compassion for the other. We're going to even have more compassion for those who've built their house on the eggshells and being able to see them and their separation, and to realize that they are almost have been bewitched by legalism and bewitched by man's religion, and that we have to unbewitch them. We have to take away the illusion, help them be a little disillusioned so that they can find reunion and so they can find that grace and see it for other people. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful thing because it's within the moment in time. It's not about escaping or to glory land or escaping to eternal damnation. It's not about that. It's about life now as we live it. And it's a pretty amazing thing. And I think this is how we help one another. This is why we speak against injustice for all people, not just the ones we see fit, or not just our own tribes or the few tribes around us, but we speak it for all. And this is why we try not to scapegoat and try not to vilify too many people. how do we get people like Donald Trump in the White House is so much separation. How do we get people who, I was a big Democrat most of my life. How do we get Democrats so far away from seeing uh, the cruelty of war and the cruelty of these weapons because of the separation? They've been separate from reality, separate from humanity. Often people aren't, often some of the smartest and brightest people have been so in their ivory towers that they've been separated from their own humanity. And we have to help with reunion. So reunion is the goal. Grace is reunion, and it's also anarchy. And helping people understand that it becomes even more and more beautiful and more inclusive, and leads us to a more beautiful life built around the public space and the community of others. But it's not easy. It's hard work. It's tiring. And Paul Tillich even kind of fell into obscurity for a little while, and he was only read amongst theologians and things like that. And I'm like, nope. This is words that need to be talked about. This is stuff that needs to be talked about. We've got to be reminded. We've got to literally look at the name of the book. I didn't even think about it. We've got to shake the foundations. So if their foundations are eggshells, let's shake them and let them crack and let them break, and let's be there to be outside and go, hey, I found a foundation that really works. I don't have to live on eggshells. I found it through loving others and being a piece. I found a solid foundation. Let me share that with you. Let's have some reunion over a meal or over a conversation or over a text or over a DM or over Facebook. Let's see if we can shake the foundations to lead us to reunion from the separation that is sin. Thanks everybody so much for tuning in today. Again, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening online, please leave us a review. 5 stars would really help. I always say 5 stars because I'm like, of course. That would be generous. You can also share this stuff on your social media. It really does help when you share these talks and stuff. We'll be putting clips from this talk up all week long and having conversations on Instagram and Facebook and all those places. So please join me there. Just a reminder, Revolution does need your support financially. We don't make it without you. We're doing a little bit better, but we can always do a little bit more. Well, I would love to be able to just have our budget be back to normal again. But you can help support Revolution financially by going to revolutionchurch.com and making a tax-deductible donation either through PayPal or Venmo. And that allows this work to continue. It allows me to bring in a paycheck. It allows us to pay the folks who handle all of our bills and things like that, and also allows us to pay those bills. So by doing that, you make this work possible. This is your community, and we are going to do this together. Jay can't just get up here and say grace and reunion and think, okay, I'm going to do it. See you guys later. I got to go off and do this work. This is all about us. This is about us as a community. And as a leader of this community, I just want to encourage you and give you the tools you need to move forward and to speak to people and to live this life and to have a really fulfilled life, have a really meaningful, passionate life through grace. And so that's kind of the goal. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your help. Thank you for tuning in. Good luck this week. If you want to hear the whole talk, you can listen to Peter Rollins do it on any of our YouTube stuff. It's on our YouTube channel, but it's also on our Apple and Spotify and all that. You can listen there as well. And if you just want to read it, if you just Google in Paul Tillich, You Are Accepted, it'll be the first thing that comes up, and you can read it, print it out, underline it, highlight it, look at it. Your mind's gonna be boggled by it. It really is. It's a fantastic thing. If I could get everybody to read it out there, I would. If someone donates $1 million, we'll make a bunch up and just give them out everywhere we can of copies of that talk. All right. Love you guys. See you next week. Let's interact this week. Always remember, turn on your notifications here, because you never know when I'm going to pop up with a little bit of a surprise for you. Okay. Bye-bye.